Commissioner Husnick,
Here.
Commissioner Huntash, Commissioner Roberts,
Here.
and Mayor Winnick.
Here, I'd ask everybody to rise for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, that brings us to item number 4, approve the agenda. Look for a motion. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. And approval of the minutes, June 25th. Again, I'll look for a motion on that.
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
One abstaining. I missed the
We got
meeting.
2 abstains?
Yeah, I missed the meeting, so.
Okay, so that still gives us 4, so motion carries. And item number 6, Headwaters Small Area Plan discussion.
President, members of the EDA, before tonight is the Headwaters South Small Area Plan discussion. If you remember back to the June 26th EDA meeting, this small area plan kind of rose to the top as the one where some of the first efforts on kind of further developing these small area plans, this one kind of became the focal point for that discussion. And it was requested that this plan be brought forward at a subsequent meeting so it can kind of get discussed further, kind of further refined, take it to the next level of detail, kind of kick it around a little bit to see if the EDA kind of likes this the way it is, if they want to make some adjustments to it. And then based on kind of that discussion is to take a look at potentially submitting this one for a pre-development grant through the Washington County CDA. So tonight is basically the time where that discussion will be had, where we can kind of start diving into this, seeing does this kind of meet the spec for what kind of the vision the EDA has for the land? Do we want to make changes to it? And then kind of if we have, after we kind of get through the discussion on changing the plan, is then kind of looking at what can we do for a pre-development grant for this one? Do we want to look at stormwater mitigation? Do we want to look at kind of like what the costing of getting utilities out there would be, making some of the road improvements, just kind of what we're looking at for a scope for a grant application, and then Ryan and I will kind of work on actually putting that together in a proposal that we'll get back at the next meeting for consideration, so we can get a grant application into the Washington County CDA here in either late July or early August.
Is there any way we can get this up on the screens as well?
Yep, and I have I also have paper copies in front of everybody just because it's a little bit easier to see with the level of detail on paper, so there are paper copies as well.
Is it possible to also have the KA land as part of the story? They are really, a married couple here, so if that could become hard copy or be shown on the screen, I think you almost have to be aware of the things that might happen there as much as you might have to be aware of what happens here.
And just to reference, that's kind of where my mouse is right now, kind of up where this Headwaters
Yes.
South is. I can see if I,
To the library.
yep, I can see if I can't pull an aerial map up of that, just 1 second.
I had a drawing of that as well that just simply reflects
Okay,
trying to
I'll-
pack it with stuff.
I'll look at that quick as well, pull that up too. So I guess at that point, maybe we start the conversation kind of on this parcel here, kind of start here, and I'll look and pull up that additional KA land as well.
Well, the only theory that sits before us here is just to see how many different scaled businesses could go. We have pretty set conditions about where arteries might be, where road entries might be, and then the idea of dividing the property between what might be more commercial and what might be more residential. Other than that, I think there's challenges to every bit of what sits here. But it was trying to say, can you have a 100,000 square foot business, an 80, can you have a 60? Is there enough land to do a series of different types of settings for commercial businesses? And that's all it really kind of suggests. And then do you make a transition between housing to more intense and then less intense as you get close to the golf course? So it's a simplistic notion sitting there right now, and I think it has a lot of room for challenge.
I guess I'm not as much trying to challenge a drawing as I think we're looking at, a couple steps ahead of where I'd like to see it at the moment. I mean, if we're looking for a pre-development grant, I think we need discussions too. I mean, I like the idea of turning this into some type of business park. You know, I think we need to reach out to Rice Creek Watershed. They're looking at more regional water treatment systems. And when I look here, we've got an extreme amount of water management. So, you know, we're losing 30, 40 acres out of 120 acres. If we do a regional water treatment system on a less desirable piece of property, which they've kind of reached out and said that's their plan, we could gain a lot more parkland, usable space, buildable space, whatever, on this parcel. So I think, you know, really is this, I think the intent of the EDA to make this more of a business park, or is it gonna be residential? Personally, I'd like to see one or the other, but the whole concept of the row houses next to, you know, behind the buildings, I think we're gonna have a lot of light infiltration issues, things like that, that we could avoid if we, you know, kept it all as business. The main road that they're going through could be more of a retail, the others could be more professional business, but maybe Donovan could put some input on that.
Well, I like, I mean, one thing I think it's important to look to here is where are we putting these main thoroughfares? Because we want to know how we can kind of link, like we talked about with that, the concept plan, and, you know, by Tanner's Brook is, for instance, is, you know, how do you loop water through there? So if we have a road that goes on the east side, how's that bring that 16-inch water line down? I understand that, you know, light infiltration and that kind of that tension you have between, you know, residential and commercial is an issue. I mean, I think some of that can be done, can take care of with screening. I mean, I don't think it has to be, you know, one or the other, commercial or residential. I mean, I think that's, in a lot of ways, a market study would indicate what might be a best use for this. You know, during, you know, greater in-depth pre-development study.
If you react to the things like the golf course and the treed area that's down there on the lower side, the south side, it suggests at least something about being low density, maybe taking advantage of that amenity. If you look at the property that bordered, or that is parallel to 61 and going south, even that will probably have a high probability of going residential more so than anything else.
Are you talking the Kraus-Anderson property?
No, I'm talking about the property that's just east of this piece, and it continues on down south paralleling 61. We kind of defined that as mixed usage, I think, if I'm remembering the plan well. That would have been a mixed usage. And the tendency in there, because you can't approach it from, you know, 61, essentially on the two edges you can, that they would have a tendency to be more of a residential statement. That's just a tendency in the marketplace, I would imagine. So that's all this was reacting to. What if you moved from the southern side and said, there's an amenity down there, there's a value down there, and let's go further north, and as we travel north, find a place to depart or change the density.
Dan, were you able to pull up the aerial?
I have, yeah, and I also have the Headwaters East one here. Is this the one you're talking about, Mark?
Yes.
So
And the
just-
only intent then again was to just say, how many types of businesses, building structures can you put on that property if you just play with some of the property edges? And it just suggests a square footage and an intensity of use.
I'll grab that aerial here quick.
And that's, you know, bordering 61, that has, you know, the immediate impulse kind of reaction from 61. Otherwise, you're coming in on the parkway, and then the parkway, as it grows and strengthens, could very well become much more of an artery. But right now, 61 is the strength of that edge. So the Kraus-Anderson land has a certain strength that the southern property that the city owns doesn't at this point have as obviously.
So the parcel that's being discussed right now is this one right here. And then those adjacent ones that Mark was saying are these ones right over here. These are under private ownership at this point.
Yep. The treat area that's got kind of an isolated property line around it, just to the south and middle, is that little piece right there is city land as well, is it not? Okay.
Yep. City land.
So I see they're marketing the stuff along 61. I don't know how effective and fast that will be done, but I think they'd start up by the Parkway and talk about mixed use, and as you go further south, it's just more and more isolated as time goes on.
And if I could correct something for the record, in our last conversation about this area, I'd said that in the future land use plan that's in draft form now, this was all future land use category of mixed use. I was mistaken. The southern part of it, kind of the area that is more adjacent to Tannersbrook, does have a residential future land use category applied to it currently. You're taking advantage of, I believe, that proximity to the golf course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that seems to make sense, you know, again, looking at amenities and the distance from your main arteries. But I think if you could, I just responded to the fact of what the national flyover for the wetlands, and I tried to supplement those given the hard surfaces and the buildings that were coming in. So the idea that we could maybe shift from that and actually claim more land along Parkway would be grand, because I think that's a valuable thought. And exactly what that is, be it retail or businesses of some sort, there's a fine line between those things nowadays. And so if you could just set up different building types that might scoot along the Headwaters Parkway and respond to the inlets, maybe that doesn't go terribly far south. I put it about splitting the property. You know, that's just an arbitrary thing that I did.
Ryan. Hey, Ryan.
Yep.
Question for you is discussions as water treatment plant, water tower. Is any of this land within a reasonable choice for that, or are we looking in different locations in the future?
A little bit farther south, if, Dan, could you pan down?
Yep.
So right there at 190th, in that big parcel, on the northwest quadrant of 61, 190th, some of your highest land in Forest Lake, which would be ideal for a future water tower and infrastructure, all right there, because if you go straight north, go further north. That last road coming down to Parkway, right there where the arrow is, a little left,
That one?
that's where the 16-inch crosses the road and stops. Everything else is 10-inch, or 8-inch until you get over to Fenway, then it's 12-inch. So ideally, you would want to continue to extend that 16-inch down through that way, because that's, you know, your big line and kind of a setup, you know, how Headwaters was originally planned to develop. And then the Met Council line, with this concept that we have in front of us, almost mirrors where the Met Council line runs. Maybe that main road running north and south where the concept has to be shifted a little west, because you would want to probably center that Met Council line right in the middle of that, therefore you wouldn't lose buildable area, you know, anyways. But that's kind of the main infrastructure for sewer and water in that area. Obviously, then you would want to loop a 12-inch back to that 16-inch sometime, but, you know, ideally, we've spotted some stuff and done some investigation on aquifer work down there. You know, you don't really know until you do some test drills, but from the geology standpoint, you know, that's kind of one of the locations we've looked at. Certainly, you could have a well and a well house up in this area, but a tower just makes sense to have farther south on that higher ground, because that's just less elevation you have to build yourself, therefore the tower becomes much cheaper, less steel.
What kind of elevation difference would we be?
Well, just across this property itself, I think we're almost 30 feet difference just from where the arrow is now to Fenway.
Okay.
And then it goes higher as you start coming farther back down to 190th. Because we've talked about if, you know, that original development, Gendai Properties we talked about a few years ago, on 190th, if we extended the sewer at minimum grade and ran it across 61 over to Granada, I think we were in the 45-foot depth range with the existing topography of the land. And then once you got passed over, you know, east of 61, it starts dropping off again.
Okay.
So you got quite the elevation in that area. If we had the GIS up, we could put on the 2-foot contours. And then turn the utilities on, I guess, so you could see it too. Up. 3 down from the water main, 2-foot contours.
You spend some time on this software, don't you, Ryan?
Every day. So that green line right there is the Met Council line. And then you can see the blue stubs coming down to the property. That's a, I believe, 8-inch there, but that one's a 16-inch right there.
So if roads honor those kind of geometries, then you could develop all sorts of loops.
Water main, you can obviously move a little more. With sanitary sewer, you're not changing its alignment. Not that line. That's big. That's all of Forest Lake sewer coming through that pipe right there
Okay.
as it heads south.
How big is that pipe, Ryan? Do you remember?
And this size right here is probably a 36-inch
Yeah.
right here. And then down at 180th, you have a big lift station. And we got one up by Interstate Companies too, Met Council lift stations. Throw in a little closer once, can you? Maybe it'll.
There we go.
Oh, there it goes. Oh, no elevations though. Oh, there's there. Starting to come in.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, if you get on them.
930, 920, so it goes up 10 there.
Got that south part.
Nine sixty.
960.
Yeah, that's quite a bit, isn't it?
It's 30 feet, yeah. So maybe, Chris, you've done a lot of work in development in this type of thing. Our next steps, I mean, what would you like to see as far as our next steps go in identifying?
Yeah, that's a great question, President Winnigan, members of the EDA. I'm wondering, just for discussion purposes, is there any possibility that you might do like a joint workshop with the Planning Commission? Just do a kind of a brainstorming session to kind of throw out a bunch of ideas and see what the reaction is, if that's a possibility or not. I think the feasibility studies could be fairly easy to do. We'd probably do a wetland delineation study, an engineering feasibility study, maybe even some geotech studies to see what the soils are like out there. But to me, I would think that the more important question would be, what should we do? Is this ideally a place where commercial should go, or is it a mixed-use development? I don't know. I just throw that up for discussion. See
Just
what
a
you
couple
think.
quick comments. Along the Headwaters Parkway that was just constructed, we had to do wetland delineations for that, so we have recent stuff with that. I believe in the original Headwaters PUD submittal included soil borings across this property. So that'd be stuff we could already have, just so you know.
Well, I guess I'd like to see the city have a discussion with the watershed district first, because I think this is an opportunity for a project where we can work together with them and maybe do more of a regional treatment farther to the west. I think there's potential there. But I think that's one of the first questions we gotta answer is just, how much usable property are we gonna be able to get out of here? Looking at the 120 acres, I would like to see as much of it for commercial property as possible, just because of the fact we have such a limited amount to market right now. We have several developers putting homes up. I mean, housing itself, I don't think we have to try to promote that, but it's getting commercial, business parks, technology, something, yeah, it's definitely not all gonna be retail. We can identify between that and the commercial, but personally, yeah, I'd like to see a majority of it go that route. I think we can reserve part of the backside for, possibly some upper scale residential if it's gonna be bordering a golf course. I just am not sure about, high density row houses there, because again, we're lacking transportation, we're lacking, those conveniences. There's not a gas station close by or a market or anything. I just don't think it would be the right product in that area, but.
Just one note about the planning commission joining forces with us. I'm always an advocate of that. I would always hope we could have more minds at the table for a workshop, so that to me is good. How much of a skeleton idea has to come forward to be considered for the grant? Can it be the primary arteries dividing property and a line between one general function without definition to another? I mean, by general function, I mean, is it gonna be commercial, retail, office park? And then if there is a jump to residential at all, how skeleton can this be in terms of description?
It's a good question, and I'll ask Ryan to weigh in on it as well. Our interest from the pre-development perspective for the grant is for commercial and industrial uses. We're not using these dollars primarily for housing. I think the housing sector will take care of itself if left on its own. Commercial and industrial may need a little bit of a jump start, and so our intent is to use these grant dollars to help the city do some planning for commercial and industrial purposes. But from a high level, maybe Ryan could weigh in, and I don't even know honestly what the cost would be to do a high level study, but that would be something that we should talk about. And the grant, we've got two pools. The small pool is for up to $10,000, and for every 20 cents the city spends on that study, whatever that study is, we'll match it with $1. And if it goes over $10,000, then it's a dollar-to-dollar match. So we'd ask you to come up with $1 for every dollar we put into it. So, but we've got some flexibility, and we've got some time. We're not, we're not really pushing you to expedite this. I think if you took your time and did the analysis and decided what you want to do there, and we can easily ask Ryan to come up with some ideas and some cost to put it on paper.
So, Dan, you can maybe help me. The Kraus Anderson property, is it just that first parcel, or do they have the first 2 or 3 down there?
This is all private. The Cross Anderson is actually located up here, I
Down
believe.
south yet?
No, so, yeah, it's on the other side of Headwaters, I thought.
Is it that one right there?
So like the parcel your arrow's on now, is that,
In the comp plan too.
We pull up the Washington County one since it has.
So out of all of that, they only own one parcel?
I'm looking at it. I'll pull up this other map here quick. What ID is that?
They own the 2 east of the bank,
Those two parallel the parkway.
and the other ones
That
are owned
one?
by Fenway Investments.
Is that Pratt?
Yes.
Okay.
Be interesting to see the
Yep.
overlay. I'd love to see
how about
that
to the
on
south?
big screen.
Right south of the parkway is the city, and then it goes private residential properties.
Yeah, these are all private residential through
Kind of blurry because
down through.
because I think those, those first 2,
yeah.
at least, if not those, all 3 or 4 of those, it'd be nice to get some feedback from those property owners if if we can include that in some type of development study, rather than just focusing on that, I mean, that might be, real desirable for, roadway or something coming in there. And Chris, you can maybe answer more, but, if we were looking to bring in data centers or, larger corporate office type environments, what are they looking for? I mean, do they want private roads into there? Do they want, certain layouts? I mean, those questions, I guess, I'd like to find out before we really proceed so that we can, do we want to put 5-acre parcels in here or 25-acre? What do we want to come up with?
President Winnick, that's a great question. For the most part, what they're looking for to get on their short list is the availability of a lot of water for cooling and broadband. And I think we've got really good broadband. We had a meeting last fall with a company that provides broadband, and I don't think that's going to be a concern. We've got to make sure that there's a good supply of water for cooling purposes. And then primarily they're looking for security. They don't want anybody to know they're there. They want to be a really well-kept secret, kind of very well protected for security purposes, mostly just to make sure that people don't interfere with what they do. The storage of their data is really important. So, you can make the building look like anything you want to. In fact, I've seen some buildings in West Metro over in Minnetonka where it just looks like a mansion. This looks like a big old house, but you never know inside of this mansion there's full of computers just running, and probably 6-7 people making 100,000 plus keeping those computers running. So, very low profile, a good neighbor, very quiet, and you'd never know they're there. Probably a lot of berms and a lot of trees planted around the building.
Well, and I know Great Rivers is really interested in getting some more along here. The water they use, is it just dumped afterwards? Do they reuse it? Do they use
That's a great
like
question.
outdoor cooling ponds? And
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think, you could do a closed loop system where once you cool that system, you recycle it and cool it again. But there will be occasionally discharge that will have to be factored into the utility costs as well.
Now, is that the type of water that we'd be able to just discharge into our stormwater system, or would that have to get treated?
My guess is that it'll have to be treated, but we could find that out. That's a great question that we should have probably Great River Energy come in and talk a little bit about what they're seeing, because the trends are changing more and more. And the cool thing about Minnesota is we've got, for the most part, a cooler climate than you'd see down in Phoenix, Arizona, for example. So we've got the ability to attract a data center is getting to be more and more popular in Minnesota. So we're seeing more inquiries come across the computer.
Well, it would be nice to see if we could maybe, again, incorporate something with Rice Creek with, stormwater treatment. If we're dealing with thousands and thousands of gallons of cooling water, if that could be discharged as well, or what we need to do for that.
Yep. I would suggest maybe a short workshop, or have somebody from Great River Energy, perhaps Bruce Saylor, come in and talk a little bit about what the recent trends are with data centers. It'd be really interesting.
Do you think the watershed's at a point where they've made decisions about the regional pond possibilities, or haven't they? Are they far away from that?
Well, I mean, we saw the topography on this site. Ideally you could position the ponding more westward to everything designed accordingly with the storm sewer. You just can't still take all this one site to one spot, because you're gonna have flooding. With all that impervious, just the velocity in the pipe, you're gonna wanna slow it down in stages. Obviously you don't need as many ponds as you're showing, but you're gonna need, a series of some just slow velocity and retain volume and stuff like that. Watershed's been here presented, they're very interested in the JD4 area, and that's a little farther south, but that eventually will be developed someday, and if you plan now accordingly, you can implement some of that stuff there too. But this obviously might be an attractive project because of the size, and I know they would participate on. They've been really good to work with, and I think they would continue that relationship.
I think one natural dynamic of this site is that when you talk about those private properties that are going down south, they're going along 61, given the lock on the east and the lock on the west for the most part, naturally it seems like we would find a center road of some sort to go down the middle of that ties into whatever happens up here. So this east and west could turn into that north and south. One way or the other, that can be a continuation. So we can be tied to those properties, and the ones closest to the parkway certainly have the ability to act just like the ones we're talking about next to the parkway. So it seems like we need more information before we can ever sit down and actually put a skeleton down on paper again. It'd be great to know about the flexibility of, I guess, some movement. But I agree with you, Ryan, there's, you know, a lot of it will be on site yet. And then how we would maybe think of this property being developed. It can be everything from the Dan Undum delivery of the suburban community thing that you set out. You can really explore that too. It doesn't seem like that's the most logical thing to head for here, but you know, you got a whole range of things that you could be here if you want to define the character of this one big spot.
I just have to throw something in here as due diligence. When you're inviting them in, I think we need to look at the negative impacts on the community for both electric and water. I've seen some things, some reports from the data centers out east where the homeowners' electric and water bills have quadrupled, and they aren't happy.
That's good to know.
So I think we need to look at that just to balance things out.
Yeah, that's a great question for Bruce when he comes in and visits with us, if that'd be okay.
Question to specifically be asked, you know, the large users that use a lot of water are gonna ask for a rate reduction. And you gotta be ready to respond on how you would
Right.
deal with that, because that's sometimes the deal breaker in some of their big building or whatever, industrial, commercial, that use a lot of water, because they want the rate reduction on the water use plus the discharge in your sanitary.
So, if we did put a new treatment facility close to here, do most of the data centers require, softened water? Or, I mean, if we just pump it and, you know, filtered water would, you know, it would save a significant amount of money on treating it, and we'd be able to provide them a separate product for that, wouldn't we?
It's rare that Forest Lake softens, or not rare that we do, but we're one of the few communities that do soften. Now, if you're gonna provide potable water to a particular business or part of the town that's not softened, you're basically running two systems.
Well, I mean, depending on where, you know, logistics, where the treatment facility would be, I mean, if we're dealing with a, you know, somebody that's using 100,000 gallons a day of water, you know, if we have to put a 10-inch pipe, you know, 500 feet to their building or 1,000 feet to their building, that might, you know, be very cost effective versus, you know, having to treat all that water. I'm just asking the question, but if we're looking at the potential of more than one or one large data center even, you know, a few dollars per 100,000 gallons is gonna add up in a hurry.
Yeah, and, you know, obviously, one of the questions when you go through the applications is, you know, when you're talking about water use and stuff, when we went through Project Pepper, was how much of the, I can't remember offhand, but how do you guys handle your water? And I thought they mentioned a lot of it was recycled. But they did inquire pretty aggressively on rate reductions on water and sewer.
Would there be a potential to actually use that surface water as cooling and then dump it back?
I gotta imagine you gotta treat it to some level so it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, there would have to be some type of filtration through it, but, I don't know. All questions I guess we need to ask in the future as we go along with this. A couple things looking at this now, and, you know, the layout here, I think the other side of Headwaters is developed as it is. We got the YMCA, the government center, the transit center over there. I think as we look at this side, it'd be nice to keep that in mind, because if we are gonna look at some type of high-density housing, some type of mixed-use commercial, I would like to see that concentrated over there. There's good potential that, you know, maybe some of this is just overflow parking for the transit center, or common use parking for maybe 2 or 3 different uses within that area. Church, anything, we should kind of look at all those different ideas and possibilities and see where we can maximize it, but Chris, when you're saying that, these data centers kind of want to be private and secured, if we pull them back from the street and,
Yeah.
Build up in front of them,
Yeah.
that might be even more desirable for them
I
than
think it would.
sticking right out there anyway.
Yep.
And I guess trying to get a feel of where we're at, but I mean, if we're looking at, a $10,000 development grant where we're committing $2,000 to it,
Yeah.
I guess for where I'm seeing this, it'd be really nice to maybe next step look at, applying for that grant and, maybe getting, some type of civil engineer designer that can, present us with not specifics, but that bigger view based on some of our feedback and obviously a lot of their experience of what's selling. So I don't know how formal application or, if city staff can present that to you, if that would be, a good next step or where you would like to see something.
Yeah, I'll have to toss this back to Ryan again too, but I would suspect that the type of study that we're talking about is pretty high level. I don't think we're designing roads or infrastructure at that point. I think we're just looking mostly at a concept. Ryan, is that correct? It's pretty high level?
Yeah, I guess before you start getting down that path, you gotta decide what you want.
I think if I could add just one point of clarity for this, I mean, it kind of seems like data centers kind of risen out of the conversation, as maybe some more information just on what the requirements for data centers are, so potentially reaching out to Bruce, have him present the next meeting to kind of say, if you're gonna design this parcel for the potential for a data center, you need to put these 3 things in, so then we could bring that back as part of that pre-development grant application. So at least we don't get too far down the path of all of a sudden, we're not, the infrastructure's not there for a data center and we have to try to, get that back in. So maybe if you bring him in at the next meeting or the meeting after, depending upon the schedule, and then he can kind of answer those questions on what do we need for infrastructure for the data center, and then kind of based on that feedback, position a data center somewhere in this parcel as an option, and then maybe get that next level engineering out, so we're incorporating
Well,
it in the
and
application.
even the Project Pepper was only 10 or 20 acres, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it was a lot, it was this whole, that
Oh,
project
the whole
envisions this
thing?
whole parcel, and in fact, I think it even included the potential, if they needed more, the potential to buy out more, they needed quite a bit of land for their
And I
project.
think when you look at a data center and you look at the vitality that this site could have, I get a mismatch when I think about that. The data center is not a generator of traffic or interaction or any kind of stuff. It's not necessarily even a good neighbor. And so what you have here is a piece of property that really could be very vital and should probably seek its maximum utilization rather than to plant a big singular business someplace that really defies neighbors. So this one's just too vital as far as I'm concerned to be saying that should be the data center. Now, maybe a data center knocks on the door first, and then we all think twice. But that usually happens. Anyway, I just don't think this falls naturally into the play of any kind of a data center story.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at a 30,000 or 50,000 square foot data center, I think it fits in there pretty well.
You can, it just, what it does, its neighbors aren't catalyzed because of it.
And it's not a big employer either.
Yeah.
Well, they employ a fair amount of people, but, they're all high tech. It's not commercial where they're coming and going all day long anyway, but,
The strongest move toward economic development is to put more businesses that are mutually beneficial and drive each other somehow symbiotically together. And that's more than anything else we do in economic development, is to try and accomplish that. And so it seems to me that if you look at this in a positive way, this site, and I think it's a terribly positive site, it's one of the best sites that Forest Lake has to offer, then I think you should think about its maximum utilization.
And I'm not ready to give up on the residential in there.
I think
I'd
there's
fight
a
you on
rationale
that.
for the residential on the southern end.
well, I don't
There's-
want to compete with the private developers that we have, and they have plenty
The private
of.
developers we have are building houses that people can't afford. the people that are retired or have two professional incomes can afford them.
We've got Lenny Pratt's putting 30-plus units of senior housing in, or common
Are they
bond is
rentals
going
or
in.
buying?
I think it's all purchased, but I'm not positive. Dan, do you
It's
know?
a combination, the
Which
Len
one?
Pratt's townhomes, those are purchased,
Those are
correct?
purchased,
Yeah, those are
They're,
purchased.
they're $400,000. And so that's a twin.
3 to 4, I bet.
That's not affordable housing, it's gotta be 200 and under, 175 to 200. To me, affordable housing, at least a little bit of it here, would give kids walking distance to school if they're going to Leela, walking distance to the Y, stick in a convenience store, bring in more people. The convenience store could service the people that are working in these industrial or commercial buildings that want to stop someplace for lunch, might bring in a couple of restaurants in this area too.
I think what you're talking about is you gotta future pace the business moving forward. So if you have a big development of residential, eventually the commercial and the retail's gotta come with it. And right now, you gotta travel quite a ways to get any kind of retail, any kind of commercial. So I think a mixed use is applicable here, for sure.
Yeah, I think so too.
So, you know, and kind of like what you were saying is future pacing further down south. I mean, if you start the infrastructure here, doing all that stuff, I mean, that just sets us up later on down the road. You know, I think hospitality here would be ideal as well. So,
Hospitality as far as hotel or?
hotel, absolutely.
You know, data centers aside, any kind of commercial business in there, you gotta have the infrastructure with, as far as roads are concerned, and it's a long ways to any really main artery there. You know, Highway 61 is about it. And, see, that.
Fenway takes you right to 97.
Well, it takes you to 97, but you could overtax that easily, I think. But it has to be a consideration when you're thinking about it. That's a wonderful.
Have you heard on this at all?
Typically not, but go ahead. We're not quite that formal here. So do you want to come to the podium, please?
Yes.
State your name, please.
My name is Jamie Jensen, and I am a residential developer. And the reason I'm here is because I've made an agreement with Tanner's Brook Golf Course to purchase property from them and to put in homes along the north side of the golf course, from Fenway all the way across the top of the 16th and I believe 17th fairway to the end of the Tanner's Brook Golf Course area. We would look at putting fairly nice houses on the golf course, and then our plan currently is to have townhomes behind them. You know, and variously talking about more affordable housing, perhaps next to that, I would be very willing to extend the project further north and to put in more affordable housing. The reason that it would be worthwhile to me is because we're bringing services about 1,700 feet down Fenway to get to the property, and that would be a way to disperse the costs and still to have the residential in the area that you've got. But along with that, if there were places to go to eat or to get gas or to go see your doctor or to work just north of that, right on the Headwaters Boulevard, that would be fantastic. For people to go to the library, to go to the YMCA, to go out for dinner, maybe to go buy a pair of shoes or something like that. That would be great to have that, all of that right there. There's a school, there's the park for the sports. But I think, you know, I'm looking at your map here, and you do have the residential right along the north of the golf course. I'd like to proceed with that. I think one of the drawbacks you have, and I think a development would help that, is currently this 120 or so, 117 acres, has dirt on 3 sides. And I don't know how attractive it would be to a commercial person to go in and say, I'm looking at a cornfield. There's nothing, you know, there's not enough synergy here for me to bring a business. But if we could get roads on, you know, you've already got one on the north, get one on the west, and then across the south where we would have the homes, that would then encapsulate that within residential, and then you might be able to bring more businesses there. So it seems like it would be synergistic if we could do the both things. Yeah.
Would you just describe again, say relative to this plan, if you've got it in front of you at all?
Yeah.
This Doesn't Pony right up to Tannersbrook then? There's land in between before the golf course really takes hold? Or are you on the west side?
No, right down where you have, it says single-family lots right off of Fenway, right down in the lower left corner down there.
Yes.
You don't touch the golf course there.
Okay, how far away are we? Enough for you to have a double-loaded kind of development?
Yes.
Okay, would that be what it would be, double-loaded?
Well, it comes in, I'm not sure I could show you this, but I can show you the plan. We tried this before and it didn't work, but.
Let me try to, I think I may be able to, if you give me a second, I may be able to pull it up from a previous agenda packet, but just give me a
Okay.
quick second.
And as soon as someone comes in with an idea that they're already generating that's gonna head someplace, it's important to see how we tie into that, absolutely. So,
Right.
this shouldn't be thought of without what you're thinking.
Okay. And after speaking with staff and after speaking with the property owner and their desire to sell to me, and we have a purchase agreement on it, I did contact builders and they're very desirous of getting into this area. There's very few lots left. There's a lot of land available. I mean, you drive around Forest Lake, there are a lot of for sale signs, but getting it to the point where you can put a house on it is another story. So there's at least they tell me that there's demand for it. When they have to write a check, that's a different story, but they tell me that there's demand for it. So I would like to do that, but then as we move away from the golf course, it becomes flatter land, much easier to make it into affordable housing if that's where you want to go.
Well, I missed the point altogether. I thought I was adjacent to the golf course, so that
Yeah.
showed how little information I had at the time, so that's important to know.
Yeah,
That's a
and it-
private thing that's gonna take its own life, take its own route.
I think about a half, maybe 40% of it, of what you've got here is not on the golf course. And then the other, maybe 50% is on the golf course, and then the last 10% isn't. So it's sort of like owned by the golf course, owned by the golf course, owned by you. So my project has me purchasing from Tanner's, me purchasing from you, and has me purchasing from Tanner's.
Oh, you're also purchasing part of the city property?
Right.
Oh, I
Right.
gotcha. So
And-
that's not just,
Are you
Okay.
able, I can try it here if you want.
Hold on one second, I think I found it.
All
I
right.
didn't catch that.
Jamie, who are you with? What company?
St. Clair Land Company.
And did you say how many units you were building?
Pie in the sky right now, we've got 30 on the golf course and 35 back.
Any
Got it.
single story in there?
What's that?
Any single story living?
The back ones are, the townhomes are,
Townhomes?
yeah. And you do, there it is.
There. Oh, there. So, let's see, where's our southern line for the city? Where's, yeah,
Do you see where the entrance is on the left side, about 2/3 of the way up the page?
yes?
Yeah, that's all golf course property. And then it starts in and you get about 10 houses in, and then that dark line is the city property line.
Okay, so you already have conversations with the city about this particular
It was
purchase?
it was also part of a workshop.
Oh,
Yeah, that's kind of what spurred the whole talk of what are we gonna do here.
Yeah, I think you had, when was the meeting on the comp plan? Was that in April?
Which meeting on the comp plan?
Where I met you when we were upstairs?
Oh, that was probably February.
Okay, that's when I first started checking out Forest Lake and looking for properties. And we've had discussions since then about it.
and then you go to the east and you dive into those private properties that are there, at least with the intention of some kind of continuation of a roadway?
Right.
But that's not part of your story at all?
No, I don't have the private properties at this point.
So
I haven't
you're-
spoken with them
You're kind
yet.
of cul-de-sacing at the end of that one then?
Right.
Well, there's brand new information, at least to me.
Right. And with that then, but I mean, it seemed to be what you guys were looking for. The part across the Tanners is residential with plenty of room to the north of that for industrial, commercial, retail, or whatever you wanted. And
Yeah, you're not penetrating that deep into it, but we gotta acknowledge then your northern property line, which is like the backyard of town row houses or townhomes, or twins, or whatever they are. So
Yeah.
that's your residential backyard along that whole edge.
Right.
And so it would either ask for another residential backyard, or it's gonna start to transition.
Right.
Mark, one of the things about, during our workshop, one of the issues was that the infrastructure cost to get to this project with the water and sewer, and who's gonna pay for it to get there.
Yeah.
You know, so that was part of the problem and part of that discussion.
Right.
So just so you know.
Yeah, but when you get land purchases already in play and, you know, you got intention that should be at least looked at as us, you know, being a good married partner to that idea. And I can see how this could develop into the backyard, and then transitioning further north to become a separation that's a boulevard or something that's grander than just, it's more like the parkway.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be a harsh proposition. And so that then becomes a dividing line between whatever else we try and do with the property.
Right, right. And so, I guess what I'd like to do is, see where you guys are on this. You had it guided for residential, and so that's where I went. And I think I'm kind of following what you were wanting to do. I hope so anyway. But starting with this then, and then, that allows us to move a little bit further north. And it's flat, there's no river running through it or something else, so there's not a lot of demand for higher cost housing here. So that would allow us to make the more affordable housing. Another project I'm working on I'm just finishing up, is in Lino Lakes. We have 35 lots, but it's on Rice Lake. $145,000 houses, they sold, there are 19 homes out of 35 being built right now. But that's not affordable housing. So, but we do have this great amenity, is the lake. And here there's a great amenity from the golf course, but as you move further away from that, it becomes more affordable and much easier to do. So I'd be in favor of not only doing this, but coming to an agreement with city to do even more.
Well, we need to kind of walk this game together then, to some degree.
Right. And, there is the only serious cost I see from the city is the cost that we need to talk about, whether you or me or however, is to bring the water down Fenway. Sewer's already at the property in the what's it called, the sewer line underneath. So we've got sewer available to us. The only thing, we've got water and asphalt, curb and gutter to come down Fenway. There's about 15 acres that I would like to purchase from you, and I could purchase that and use that money to put in the infrastructure if you wished, or we could come to some agreement to get to that point somehow.
The utility, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think before we can do that is where this discussion began with is, what are we gonna do with that 120? I personally don't want to see residential units getting built, people moving in, and then all of a sudden, hey, don't put that big business next to me. Because residential properties cost us more in taxes than what we get out of them. That's a fact. So we do need those commercial businesses to support the city. We need, we need a mix of both. Obviously, we need people to support the businesses, but we need the businesses there as well. So, having this thing planned properly before people start moving in, 120 acres behind them, and thought all that woods and cornfields were gonna stay pretty like that and not get developed is not what I'd like to see in the future. I mean, we're just trying to avoid that type of conflict anyway.
Right. And it seems like, to me, and of course, you guys know this much better than I do, I've only been doing this since February here in Forest Lake, is there's abundant land. There's over on 35, there's abundant land there, which good freeway access that's, I don't know why that's still vacant, because, and it's for sale. And there are other properties as you get closer that would make, I would think, again, I just do residential, I would think would make more sense for commercial industrial to be over near the freeway exit.
Where are you talking?
The ones that are.
That's in Columbus.
Yeah.
Okay, right off it, right, that.
That's all Columbus.
Oh, I
That's not
thought
Forest Lake.
Forest Lake doesn't go all the way to 35?
No.
Oh,
No,
Oh.
we're hard pressed to get that kind of access from our side, so.
Yeah,
And even to get that access is a battle based on, you see the connectors now, and to fight for a future connector is a longer-term battle. So no, we're hurting on the south side to get any kind of highway, obvious highway access. And so that's been a dilemma that we've had. At any rate, you know, I think we need to talk energy, we need to talk watershed, we need to see if there's things moving down a path, like this has already started to move down a path. I certainly would need to see other kinds of outside input that will start to tell us, working with the planning commission, have that joint session. Talk it through so that we're starting to talk about the actual complexion of a business park and how you do start to set it up. And then we decide how far we have to go, because maybe just the road division is road division and an intent. Chris isn't here right now, but an intent on those larger platted quadrants that are not even platted, but around that road division would tell us a lot if we decided that within this context of 400,000 square feet, we could put A, B, and C. And then we'll start to see what might fit those kind of zones that are desirable businesses that find a future, you know, where we're really satisfying a future. So I'm all for keeping the strength of commercial, retail, industrial, manufacturing. I'm all for, all the whole comp plan notion was to save land for those purposes. Because as soon as we try to fight, and these have arteries, you know, as soon as we try and fight and get off of 35, we're in trouble.
The only thing that I don't wanna see is you have somebody that's willing to invest in our community and has some traction. I don't want him to, or your company to have false hope and then move on somewhere else and we lose an opportunity either, so. It's kind of my 2 cents. I would still love to have move forward with the conversation, whether we choose or whatever we do, but we don't want to lose the opportunity for him and investing in our community, so.
Well, that's why I like to see us walk together, because a major landholder like that, once you accumulate the property, is gonna have a real say about what they wanna do. And if we can marry together with philosophies about affordable housing and stuff, you know, which has a marketplace in the future.
right.
And so that's just a unique animal that doesn't exist out there too much. So that'd be something to really keep talking about. But we got a few steps ahead of us, I think, and we gotta gather in some information. I hope you're not on some really fast, dramatic timeline.
Well, in my current project, I opened up 35 lots in December and 19 are under construction. In 2007, I couldn't gift a lot away.
Sure.
You know, 2008, 2009. Is that time coming now? I've got builders who are looking for lots currently, you know. Does it take 3 years to make a decision on here? That we may have missed the boat, or missed my boat anyway.
Yeah. Well, when I see something like this, I see a fast timeline set up. But if you have enough comfort to let us go through a process, we can define that time. I would think we could. We're gonna spend so much time doing this, talking about it and getting our input. And we could define that time, and then you could talk to us about how that felt.
Sure. Well, from my timeline, to back it up, I can't really do anything physical until the snow melts. And of course, snow hasn't even fallen, but I can't do anything till maybe April. So if it takes me 120 days to get it approved, I should be somewhere in November, sometime in November, be putting the plat forward. So probably sometime in October maybe, I should have my engineer and surveyor working on it. So, I mean, there's still a lot of playtime in there, but
Not much.
that's some time anyway to, you know, till next year, you know, start to work next year. I mean, the idea of having the commercial and a place to work and go see your doctor's walking distance, that would be very attractive. You know, and I'm listening to what you're doing, it seems like you're trying to drive something, but you don't have any customers for it. And you want to set it up for commercial, but is there any demand for commercial? You know, are you holding the property for someone or for no? I don't know. But
There's an unsure future, but then again, there's a future you you got to command, you know, there's a future you got to take control of. And if we give it all up to residential, then we have our, like the mayor just said, we have our dilemma about not having enough, the real tax base growing that we need to have growing. So we've got to save the logical places for that, but we can marry together with other ideas.
You gotta support the residential ones it's in.
Yeah.
So, and usually there's that lead and lag time in that from residential to commercial for the development piece, so.
As an example, look what happened in Hugo along Frenchman's Boulevard. They put in all those townhouses and homes, and suddenly the restaurants came in, the medical came in, all the support services came in, and that's become quite an active area, and the businesses adding to the tax base. Down on White Bear Parkway, they've got industrial, commercial on one side of White Bear Parkway. They've got townhomes, they've got lower end affordable housing on the north side of 96, and they've got more upscale, the Pondview townhomes that are in the $400,000 range on the other side, and they're right across the street from
Well, and,
industrial.
maybe those are a couple things that, I don't know if you can, or just the names of them, but, it'd be nice to get layouts of those types of developments and see, the ones that are successful, the ones that are going now. And, is this, that type of layout applicable to the land we have here? Because,
We've got the
obviously.
start with the Y, with Leela there, with the walking distance, the walking trails, and the athletic fields. We've got activity going there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Ryan, do we have a trail complete to Leela now, or is that in the
It's
plan?
complete
It is complete, okay.
on the north side of the parkway from, well, this summer we'll extend it even further west with the Headwaters 11th edition. So to go from there all the way to 61.
Okay.
I could see us in a couple meetings, maybe even push it to 3, pushing it to 4, because I know how this thing goes. We can have the input, that we've been talking about having. And we could have work together with the planning department and staff, and we can have a better universal thought about what's gonna go on here. And so that's not that far out. And then I guess what we're trying to push for here is to define it enough so that we can look at working with the county on grants to get it defined even better. And once we've done that, I think you're at the point where you can actually talk about parcels and values and things like that. But I don't see that pushing, it'll push up to your timetable, but I can see it being accomplished, as a conversation before that.
And Ryan, just back of the napkin calculation to get, water, curb, gutter, street, that 1,900 feet, we're talking a couple million,
300 a foot.
okay. For water too? All right, so, Chris isn't here, I guess. I think
Chris had
we've
to
got a
leave.
lot to go on to
Can I
the
just
next
ask
meeting.
a couple more questions? This will tell me a little bit about how we're pacing ourselves. Have we ever gotten from Ryan, on the Herrick property, have we gotten a proposal at that stage where we say, are we moving forward on that? We've talked about that also, but where are we at that?
We've
Have we got-
just not defined what we want, so Dan and I have been trying to talk to if anything's ready, and then kind of we shifted to this site, so I just need clear what to put together.
Yeah, so to answer your question, we kind of were at the Herrick property, we were at the point at the last meeting, trying to define that one, and then this one kind of, the deck kind of shuffled a little bit last meeting, and this one kind of rose out to the top, so then the focus kind of became, this parcel. I mean, I think, if you're gonna pick one project or the other, that's kind of the recommendation, is kind of put your muscle behind one versus kind of spread it out at this point. I just don't think we're resourced enough to really kind of do two major, plans. I think we're probably better off picking one or the other, and I think this was the one that after last meeting kind of, after seeing the concept layout, kind of was the one that kind of jumped to the front, is like, if we put the development money on this parcel on the commercial side, we may get something that, comes in a little bit quicker.
Well, this is a logical one, but I'm just trying to get a sense of pace, because we started talking about the Herrick property quite a while ago, and it's now just to the point we're saying, maybe not that one, this one. And so just the sense of pace, that we get things done and we get actually move forward. this is an example to me of something where, I don't know how many people on the EDA knew about this. Is it just a city council discussion up to this point at workshops? Is
I don't think
it-
this land was really discussed much until, I mean, we've always held it in reserve,
This
because,
development right here.
So there was
Oh, no,
one,
just
one
last
meeting that
meeting.
came forward, and the reason why it came forward was that since the city's land exchange was gonna potentially be a part of it, so before, Jamie went and got way out of the gate on the, put the horse out of the bar on this, and we basically said, is there any appetite at that, at that point? They said, bring it back to the EDA, which we had on the work plan, I was gonna bring it forward on it, and then this kind of Headwaters concept plan kind of came through, so it's kind of like, you got a confluence of a bunch of kind of unique situations that kind of led to, to this. This wasn't like, the Jamie Jensen thing came forward, and I think it was June, or the June workshop, so not that long ago. I mean, this is all fresh. This has not been sitting on the table for a year, and kind of came forward. It's all literally kind of just, has kind of intersected tonight,
As
it's
long
kind
as the council and the EDA talk about these things together in some fashion, then the EDA is doing what I thought it's supposed to do.
well, and that's where this 120 acres was brought back to us to look at, was, the initial conversation with developing part of it, but that was the part of the south portion. What are we gonna do with the rest of the land? Because there's no way that this one development would cover the costs of bringing down everything to it.
Understood.
So we wanted to have more of a master plan, and, whoever may potentially move in here knows that, here's what we're planning to put in your backyard, before they even, put a dollar down on it or look at it.
Sure, I understand
So
that.
this is all evolving fairly quickly anyway. And I think the Herrick property, I think the other things that came up on that were, there's some struggles with, some wetland right at the moment that, I don't know if that's all been covered yet or not, but I know there were some issues there anyway with the drainage and things, so.
Is that what the construction was along its sort of westerly edge all the way up to 97? Was that what that land movement was all about?
It's 97?
Yeah.
I
there
don't
was
think
some-
Herrick property even goes to 97.
Well, no, it doesn't, but it's part of a system of water flow, and so was that part of that solving whatever that?
Public Works did some work.
Public Works did some work.
So I guess my question is, which one are we gonna move forward on? Because if we keep going back and forth, each one, I think we need to make a decision before we adjourn today. Are we gonna focus on this one, or are we gonna focus on that one? Because that would be, we'd have a little bit more pointed, it would give you some clarity, and it would give everybody else a little bit of clarity.
Well, if we're just gonna do one, that's the conclusion, and this is city-controlled land, it seems to be the obvious proposition to shift gears to this one. And this one doesn't have the characteristics of the other one being purely industrial, but this is, I think, more dynamic.
I agree.
So that would be my 2 cents worth in terms of which one we grab. If we can grab two, then we can move ahead on two, but I don't know what our appetite is for doing these things.
Well, I think too, just from, if you're trying to do two at one time, I mean, I think your resources, from a staff resource perspective, that's gonna spread staff pretty thin to try to focus on two of them at one time. I think we're probably better off putting all of our eggs in one basket in terms of like, let's focus on this one, get this one done, or whatever one leads out, get that one done correctly first, and then we'll get a gauge of what the staff requirements are for that, and then we may be able in the future be able to run 2 or 3 of these simultaneously, but right now, there's a lot of unknowns in terms of what the staff requirements are gonna be to kind of shepherd these things through the process.
And we already have a willing partner that's willing to talk with us, so I think that's,
Well, let's learn from this one. But we gotta move it forward, that's my,
So we're running out of time here, but for next meeting, we'll have a list of potentials, some things to sort through as far as what we want to see on the property, and potential pathways to go forward as far as getting grants, or, how we can lay those next 2 or 3 steps out to get to that end goal.
And I think at some point,
establishment of meetings or some sort of input, or the establishment of our working with the.
And I thought we were
planning
gonna
department.
workshop with the planning
Yeah.
commission.
I think at some point, I think the sequence would be, I think we'll just kind of keep this as a standing item on the agenda until we kind of get through either grant applications submitted, or this kind of evolves. I think at some point, it's probably gonna be advantageous to get Great River Energy, Bruce Saylor in, just to at least inform the EDA what are the requirements for a data center. So those questions can at least be asked of an expert, of the subject matter expert. So then it'll either A, help to position some of that industrial side for a data center, or it'll eliminate it from the conversation, then we can focus on what actually is attainable for that
Or the
section.
regional ponding, that to me is a big one.
And I'll get Rice Creek as well to kind of talk about some of those other two options. So we can at least kind of maybe, yeah, as we work through what this will look like, I think some of those informative sessions will help to kind of help guide the conversation, help guide some of those decision points as we move forward. Because there's a lot of, potential questions that are still out there. And you want to make sure, with this one being a dynamic parcel, you want to make sure that it is done right with the right amount of education for the EDA and the planning commission and the council at that point as
So we
well.
gather that in within a month's time?
I'll make some calls. I'll see what Bruce's schedule is and get him on the next agenda that he's available on. So I'll get that in, as soon as I possibly can.
It seems if you want the larger input, unless that's confusing, the planning department, EDA, and however else you want to construct this, that would seem to be the next step, so that we have a lot of ideas that have been thrown out there and shotgunned. And then this group could settle into talking about how they see more of the final articulation of the territory. And that could be 2 months out now, if we do all that.
One other thing too, just if this property is, which I would agree would be the one to go for, but to reach out to those individual larger property owners on 61 and see what their appetite is to be involved.
And I think we also have to be cognizant of his timeline, because my calculations and based on what you said, we got about 3 months to kind of figure this out before you need to start, getting close to the deadline, so. I mean, if you're looking at, at October, end of September, we got about 3 months. Yeah.
I just love setting dates. I love setting, goals. I want to see us achieve some goals.
I think what we can do is at a staff level, I'll work with Donovan and Ryan and kind of look at what's a realistic schedule to try to get this moving forward. I'll bring a schedule next meeting, and if I can get anything else on that agenda, say Bruce Saylor can come next meeting, I'll get him on there, but we'll start moving that forward. We'll start to develop a timeline to get those boxes checked and get this, plan kind of to the next level of detail. So we'll start to get that. We'll get some traction behind it, but I'll work with staff to try to get those schedules developed and brought forward.
All right, thanks, Dan. Given the time constraints, I would suggest that we table item 7 to next meeting.
It was more of I didn't know how long the
Yep.
first discussion would be, so it was just on there as a discussion point, but there's no time, it's not time sensitive by any means.
All right. Do we have to have a motion to table, or just we'll go for an adjourn,
I probably just a motion table just for,
So moved then, Mr.
or? All
Mayor.
right. And a motion and a second? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, motion carries. And I'll look for a motion to adjourn at that point.
Just one question, on David Rachi and the Hool property, where does that stand real quick? Just kind of an update maybe to.
Donovan?
I haven't heard anything on that recently from there. It's been kind of quiet on that.
The Hool property. Yeah. They're still active, interested, they'll show up.
All right, so, is it something you want the city to reach out to, or just let private development go until they come back to us?
He put a couple calls into me, and I've had short conversations, so I understand it, but I just didn't know if he was going to.
I don't think it's
Yeah,
moved through the
I think
city.
it's
Yeah,
been over a year since.
Yeah,
we heard anything.
the last I heard was basically that last meeting he came before the EDA. That's kind of the last I've heard on that, and, I think it's probably on the back burner at this point, but nothing official has come forward, so.
All right.
I
Any
just
other-
have one question, sorry.
Go ahead.
So have we decided we are going to have a meeting with the planning commission and find out what's?
Well,
In the future, I
The
think we
future.
have to further define where we're at in the project.
But how do we define where we're at in the project unless we know what they're thinking?
I think Dan was gonna
I'll
write
work
up a
with,
progression.
I'll get a plan at the next meeting, so we'll actually have the next level of kind of the sketched outline.
Okay.
And I'll work with the different groups to make sure that happens. And then just before the meeting adjourned, just for one moment of clarification, that email that was sent out, I just want to give credit, that was actually President Winnick's suggestion on that small area, or the multi-use, so I don't want to claim for it, but that was actually, I got that email, so I forwarded it on behalf of President Winnick on this one, so.
Probably have to give the writer credit, I just found the article.
Yeah, no, it was a great find,
It was very interesting, and I think that does have some opportunity there. so.
Yeah, I think more towards the front
Yep.
than the back anyway. I think, you know, with what we have going on there right now, it could complement it really
It's a
nice.
good future pacing idea that, you know, as we move forward, but, you know.
To create that kind of community, you need at least a family.
Yeah.
So. All right. Any other discussion? If not, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.